strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do all according to the law. There is where the blessing comes from, is when we live according to the law of the Lord. But I'm glad Jesus fulfilled that old law, and today we have that new covenant where it's through His blood and through loving Him and through loving each other. I'm glad we don't have to follow the 618, 19 rules. 613. I knew it was six something, and I'm glad we don't have to dot all those I's and cross all those T's. But if we just love the Lord, that is how we can walk, being very strong and courageous with the Lord. Which thy servant Moses commanded thee, turn not to thy right hand nor to the left, that thou mayest prosper wherever thou goest. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Have I not commanded thee? Here it is once again. Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee, wheresoever thou goest. Here, God told Joshua 3 different times, be strong and very courageous. This morning, as we deal with the chamber of memory and with our heart, you'll go through the files of your heart, the different events in your heart. You'll go through the different chapters of your heart. Here, if Joshua would have looked upon the first few chapters of his life, he would have seen where Joshua saw much failure. He saw a lot of success. He saw the children of Israel come out of Egypt. He saw the great miracles, but then time after time, he saw the people of God just fail. He saw the people of God not inherit the promises. It was not supposed to be a 40-year journey through the wilderness. They were not supposed to spend that many years in the wilderness. And Joshua, it was supposed to be a short journey, but because of their sin, it became a long journey. And Joshua could have felt much discouragement. He could have looked at the past failures of taking the promised land. He could have just said, oh, this will never come to pass. But God here was speaking to him, be strong and very courage. We can do that with our own life oftentimes. We can see through the first few chapters of our life that maybe there's been much failure, maybe there's been much heartache, maybe there's been much just hurt and destruction, whether it's with family, different relationships. And we can look at those past chapters and try to predict the end of the book. How many of you guys, when you read a book, you try to figure out how the end's going to be? I know I'm not much of especially a storybook reader. I don't think I've really read. I'm not much of a fiction book person, but in school when I'd have to read them, I'd always, what's going to happen at the end? And we'll oftentimes do that with our own life. And if you do, you'll begin to judge those chapters and predict a future that God did not promise. You cannot predict your future by your past, because oftentimes you'll predict a future that God does not promise for your life. We just need to trust the Lord. What happened yesterday doesn't have to affect what happens tomorrow, especially if you trust the Lord. If you continue, a pastor always says he can predict when somebody's getting ready to walk out the door, because they'll start being faithful, then they'll start falling back in the church. They'll start out in the front rows, and you'll end up in the back rows. Oftentimes, when people get outside the will of God, you can predict what's going to happen. You can predict the destruction. But when you trust in the Lord, when you are strong and courageous, you can't do that. That might work in the natural sometimes, but that does not work in the supernatural. You cannot predict what's going to happen, or you'll predict a promise that God does not have. Joshua, he could have blamed those who were supposed to lead them. He could have been upset with God for not allowing Moses to bring them in. He could have looked in the past, and he could have gotten mad. God, why didn't you allow Moses to do this? Why didn't you allow the generations before? He could have seen what had happened in the past generation and gotten upset. Joshua, but God was looking for Joshua to have the courage to believe that things would be different than what they had always been. Courage to believe for the promise. I believe that's one of the areas where God was speaking courage to Moses, was to believe for something different, to believe that it was going to be different this time. Sometimes when you go through seasons of life, you always think, I'm not going to use the word always, I don't want to speak that, but it's easy to think that here we go again. It's been like this time after time, and the results are going to be the same. But we need to have courage and strength and believe that God's going to do something different this time, especially in our nation. Sometimes it gets discouraging to see just the same destruction time after time. It gets discouraging to see the cities and the uproar time after time and all the fightings. But I believe that the church needs to be strong and courageous in this hour and believe for something different. Let's not believe that there's going to be 500 murders in the streets of Chicago next year. Let's believe that there'll be 5 million souls saved in Chicago next year. And we need to have strength and courage to believe that. And if we try to predict what's going to happen next year by the previous chapters, we'll predict a promise that God has not intended. And it's easy. I often don't know about you, but I like to know what's going to happen tomorrow. I like to be prepared. I like to figure out what's going to happen. And oftentimes we cannot do that. We just need to trust the Lord. Courage is not just the ability to do what scares you, but courage is the strength in the face of pain and grief. Strength in the face of maybe those bad memories. Courage says no, it's going to be different this time. Courage is to be able to do something that maybe in the past you've been afraid to do. Maybe courage is going up to witness to somebody that maybe in the past has not wanted you to speak to them at all. Courage can be going to your spouse and saying, I'm sorry for a disagreement that we've had. Courage is doing the right things even in the face of just heartache. Courage says no, it's going to be different this time.
It's also looking at your past and seeing what happens if you don't make the same mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Or you don't have to keep going around the mountain.
Right.
And going around the mountain.
Right.
Breaking that thought, breaking that action, breaking that will.
Mm-hmm.
So you learn and you don't keep making the same mistakes.
Right. Sometimes God will send us around the mountain till we learn the lesson. And sometimes it takes a little whooping. But wisdom and courage is to be able to change. If you want a different result than what you have right now, you have to do something different. That's probably a law of physics right there. If you want something different to happen, you need to change. You need to change the direction of something. And it's important with our own walk. If you aren't, none of us should be content with where we are at in Christ. And the question is, what are we going to do to learn from our past experiences? And I'm sure here over these 40 years, they learned that, that they once they realized that they had messed up and not that they did not go into the promised land. They at first they were scared of their enemies, and they did not want to take the promised land. But then, when that window of opportunity was gone, they had tried to go in and possess the land, and God's blessing was not upon that, and they ended up suffering much defeat. And so I'm sure that they learned that when the window of opportunity is there to go in and possess the land, they had to take it. Brother Orville, what was that saying you always say? An opportunity of a lifetime must be taken in the lifetime of the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And that's a lesson that is probably a hard one to learn. That when you have the a window of opportunity to do something, that you must take that window, because that window will come to a close. Brother Orville?
So many times people come to the altar and they pray. They actually rid themselves of whatever sin or whatever it is that bothers them. Like this lady had said earlier, knowing should teach us not to do it anymore. But yet somehow between praying there and going back outside, we lose whatever wisdom it was that had been student enough to say, stop it, don't do it, quit. There have to come a point in time where you seize upon it and you mean it. You've got a made up mind, no matter what. I'm not going there again. I'm not
Right.
doing that. And that, when you get to that place where you're totally and completely committed to God,
Mm-hmm.
then there will be a restoration. You can believe that.
Right, right. Amen. Well, I pray the Lord gives us the strength this morning.
Also, we have to speak life into these situations.
Mm-hmm.
Just have them in our mind. We have to speak to them. And God has something to say about everything.
Right.
And if we start speaking His life
Mm-hmm.
into our situation, it might not happen overnight, but it's consistency that brings the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to keep at it and keep
Right.
every situation is that.
Mm-hmm.
God in. You start casting out those dark thoughts that are not of Him.
Right.
And use His and speak life
Mm-hmm.
into your life.
I think that's one of the reasons why God spoke to Joshua here 3 different times. Be strong and very courageous, because God wanted Joshua to get this. God wanted Joshua to realize that he can be strong and very courageous. And that's not just taking the promises, that's living out the promises that God has. As it takes, one of Pastor Don's quotes is that anything dead can float downstream, but it takes something with life to swim upstream. And when we allow God to speak this strength and courage to us, we can fight against this world out here. This world out here does not want you to live for Jesus, but it takes life. It takes courage and strength. Brother Gary?
And they have to cross over Jordan. Jordan in Hebrew means death. You have to die to self.
Mm-hmm.
Realize you can't do this. Only Yeshua can. Yeshua can only take you into the promised land, not Moses. That's the law. The letter kill it.
Mm-hmm.
The spirit give life. The commandments and legalism and laws and rules and rituals can only lead to death.
Right.
But Yeshua can take you into that promised land, but you must die to self. You have to die like Evangelist Hessel said. You have to be willing to die.
Mm-hmm.
That's the courage. You have to be willing to die to yourself and realize, I cannot do this. Lord Jesus, you have to do this. And when you get into that promised land, which is your soul, the promised land is not heaven. The promised land is your soul. And you got to cast down strongholds, those high cities. Those walled cities have to be brought down. You're going to have to fight the Hivite, the Amorite, the Hittite. You look those up, they mean things. One of them means fear. One of them means pride. Okay, you got to pull those down in your Christian life.
Mm-hmm.
And the battle for your soul, the sanctification of your soul to take back the promised land. You're saved, you came out of Egypt, but now I got to get the Egypt out of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts at Jordan.
Right. That old man has to die. There's no desires of our old man that will inherit the promised land. Is anyone else? Brother?
Early on, you mentioned the laws that Moses, that was given the Israelites, and there was 613. And, I always wondered as a young Christian, how is it that if we break one law, we're guilty of breaking them all? You know what I mean? Because in our mind, that seems unjust. If I'm guilty of lying, then why would I be guilty of stealing the same way, in a sense?
Right.
But a guy showed me one time, and it just
I'm glad that the blood of Jesus can be thrown upon the picture of my life and restore. And on that judgment day, He's going to look at that perfect blood, and we'll be washed clean. In the face of memories that say, because that's the way it was, that's the way it'll always be. Courage says no. It's going to be different this time. Courage will give you the strength, and God's promises will give you the strength that the way it's always been doesn't have to be the way that it always will be. Joshua had to have that kind of courage that said, we're not wandering anymore. We're going to go ahead and do more than what was done in the past. Courage will take you past your current circumstances. Courage and strength and just the blessing of God will take you past what things have always been. Courage gives us strength in the face of events that have caused us pain. Oftentimes, especially when you cross a point in your life that it's always been painful. Maybe it's experience with a certain person. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's who knows what it is. Courage will be able to give you the strength to be able to deal with things that have caused pain in the past. Courage is the anti-venom for the poison of tragic memory. Tragic memory will become a venom that poisons you over and over again. If you have a tragic memory in your past, every time that memory tries to surface again, it'd be like a venom that just keeps on irritating and irritating. The reason you have to remove the stinger out from a sting bite is because it continues to pump poison long after it's detached from the bee. I know this here is Jenny's job. Seem like our kids, they love being barefoot, running around. Our house is built in the middle of an old hay field, so there's lots of clover. And come springtime, summertime, those honeybees. Brother Rodney, he actually grew up right around that property, and he said there was a natural beehive back in the woods. And that beehive must still be there because there's bees all over our place in the yard. And they'll come in, and Jenny will pull that stinger out, and it's because that venom stays in that stinger. If it's not pulled out, it will continue to irritate the foot. And tragic memory, heartache is much the same way. If you do not deal with that hurt, if you don't deal with that tragic memory, that pain, it will just keep on pumping that venom, that hurt, down within inside you. But when we have the courage of God, He will give us strength to overcome that. Past experiences can be the same. Maybe it's, have you ever just had a bad experience with somebody? Maybe the person's name is Tim. I don't think there's any Tims in here. Every time you meet another Tim, there's just that gut-wrenching feeling that you have. I don't know about you, but if I've experienced that myself, is if I've had a heartache with a certain person, whenever that name comes back up, that's when you know that stinger is still in there, that there's still some poison, some venom that is still pumping. But God will heal us. The courage God spoke over Joshua is the anti-venom for that poison of that tragic memory. Joshua had all those memories of 40 years of just wandering around. But when God spoke that courage and strength 3 different times, that there was the anti-venom of all those bad memories where he could walk into the promises that God had given him. Go back to where you had that tragic pain or memory and release it to God and let Him heal you at the source of the pain. Go back. God is not a God of time as the way we see things. And God can go back to where that hurt had happened, where that pain had happened. He can heal you at the very spot. You need to just allow God to be God and allow Him to speak to you and to heal that past pain. So that way, every time a Tim comes into the room, you don't feel that pain anymore. He'll heal your past and give you courage to face the future. You know, we've all have suffered things in the past. We've all wandered around in the wilderness for years around the same mountain. But God will, He'll heal your past so that we can have courage to face the future. Joshua needed courage to believe that they were not going to wander through the wilderness anymore. Courage to believe that they could do what the previous generation could not do. And we need to have courage. You know, I'm believing for a last day outpouring, church. You know, I'm believing for the church to rise up to be, you know, the first century church. And that's going to take a whole lot of courage, because we've seen the church fail. We've seen some success in the church, but it's still not what God has intended it to be in its perfection. And it's easy to say in our minds, he'll never be perfect until Jesus comes. You know, but that there's our mindset by judging the past chapters. But I believe that we can be what the God has called us to be, that we can operate in unity, we can operate in love, we can operate in the perfection of the gifts of the Spirit. And it's going to take courage, it's going to take strength in order to fulfill that call that God has on this church. You may not have to look back you may have to look back and say, you know, I'm going to be different than my past. You know, maybe it's a marriage that has failed. Oftentimes, if you have had rough past relationships, you might think that maybe the next one will fail as well. Maybe your mom or dad has been addicted, and I'll be addicted. Oftentimes kids see what their past generations have been like, and they'll predict their own future. But with courage, we can say that we will not be that. And maybe you've had a job after job that has just failed. But with strength and courage, we can believe that God will give us victory. And maybe no one in your family has served Christ, but you can have the courage and the strength that it's going to start with me. It's going to start with just this generation. But with courage, you can produce a multi-generational kingdom wealth to build God's kingdom. I was thinking within our own organization, there are some past generations, especially when the Church of God Mountain Assembly started, that there was some people that in their past generations, they were moonshiners, they were just rough Appalachian people, but they had the strength and the courage to make a difference in their life, and it affected generations. I think of the Waldens and the Petries and the Pruitts, and just the mighty families in our organization. Why? Because they had the courage and the strength to say, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be different than the past generations, and you're still seeing the fruit of that today. I was thinking, I pray that's so with my kids. I've got 4 little kids running around, so I've got a lot of seeds out there that can go forth. And I pray that, really looking back, I had a great-grandmother. My grandfather's mom was a mighty woman of God. She was just a woman of faith, and I think she had started a Bible study for the high school football players. My grandpa wasn't going to go, but then once all of his friends started going, he decided he better go. And I believe that passed on through my grandfather and my dad, and I believe I can really trace back my deep faith to that one grandmother, and I'm just thankful for that. So what you do today will affect generations, but it's going to take courage, and it's going to take strength that this time is going to be different, and it'll affect generations after you. Sister? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
when Jesus comes back, he's going to find faith from sea to sea, from border to border. And that's, of course, me, that's why I'm asking. I'm
Right.
taking everybody with me. I'm not leaving anybody behind.
Mm-hmm. Amen. I believe that as a nation, we have a window of opportunity here, and it's up to the church. And God's not going to hold his thumbprint on us, or you do what I want you to do. And we have a choice, and we have to be strong and courageous during this season. It may not have happened before, but it's going to happen now, because you dealt with the chamber of memory. So as we finish up that lesson there this morning, I was try not to predict what's going to happen in the future by what's happened in the past. Allow God to heal what's in the past. And that might come through deliverance. That may come through just giving it to God. There's a number of different ways, but just allow God to speak, because it's hard to press on in the future when you're holding on to the past. And just allow God to speak to you this morning. And I believe God, actually I know God is up to something. Let us just trust him and be very strong and courageous in this hour.